Maurice and Louise's place in Fremont, and we want to do an interview with my dad, Joseph Indig, and we're trying to get him to give us some recollections of his life as much as he could. So, Dad, first, can you give us your name and tell us when you were born, and then follow that with whatever recollections you have of your early life?
My birthday is September the 10th, 1904. That's when I was born. I was born in the Lower East Side of New York City. I spent most of my boyhood childhood in the Lower East Side till about the age of probably maybe 12, at the age of 13, 12, 13, something between 12 and 13, because after that period of time, we moved to Brooklyn. We were Brooklyn in the Brownsville section of New York, Brooklyn. And I finished my public school education back in Brooklyn. So I got my diploma from public school, my public school period. I decided that I wanted to become some kind of a mechanic.
Dad, I just want to interrupt you for a minute. You basically started when you were 12 or 13 years old. What about earlier than that? Can you give us anything about your life earlier than that? What is your earliest recollection? What about your life, not so much what you did later, what about your life with your parents and whatever you remember about that? That we don't...
Well, we lived in the Lower East Side.
What street?
We lived in Lewis Street. We lived in Lewis Street on the Lower East Side in a tenement house. And we lived, I think it was on the 4th floor. And in those days, if you had to use the bathroom, you go in the hall, because the bathrooms were on the whole floor, taking care of the whole floor. There was no bathrooms in the apartments. And that was when I was quite young. And I remember playing in the street with the boys. All the kids around the block. We had a lot of fun. We used to play hide and seek. And we also played what they call, today you call it hockey. We played that in the street. In those days, there was no traffic in the side streets like where we lived, so there was no reason to worry about traffic. And we also used to play other games too. We'd play in the winter time. We'd play what you call sliding. In the winter time, it seemed to be that we had the ice on the sidewalks were frozen, and we used to slide. We started a slide, and we could slide all the way down half a block probably. All the way down from Delancey Street, maybe sometimes it's up between the middle of the block till Rivington Street. And that was a lot of sport we had as kids.
Was that on your feet you slid, or with a sled?
No, we just sled. We just like we'd have ice skates, but we didn't have ice skates. We just wore shoes. We slid. By sliding on the ice, we made it smoother and smoother so we could go faster. That was one of the sports we used to have. And when the time came when there wasn't no snow in the street, but it was cold, like wintertime, we used to have a little fire. We used to build a little fire from a little wood. We used to collect a little piece of wood from the wooden boxes, and we'd have a fire either on the curb. So we all sit around there, and we'd get sweet potatoes, and we put sweet potatoes on into the fire, and we'd have sweet potatoes. Kids, but we used to enjoy having a roasted sweet potato. And we also used to talk about different stories. I recall we had one particular meeting. We had a meeting, and one of the boys there, his name was Sammy Cohen, and he turned out to be a prize fighter. And he was a pretty good prize fighter. He was like the life of the party. And I recall seeing him many years later. That was after he retired from fighting, and he turned out to be a very heavy, fat boy. He was a little guy. He was a flyweight when he was fighting, but this time he was built up like a barrel. He was very, very heavy, but he was still the same person. And I saw him for a little while, not much, but that was one of the incidents of my early life. And I was sent as I think when I must have been about probably 6 years old, there was a place where we'd go for to teach. They teach us to be to learn how to daven in the shul. You know, to learn to daven, because my father was very religious, and he made sure that I should learn how to daven. Well, all right, I went to shul, and I went to this little place. This place was like the rabbi of that store at that particular time. He was a pretty heavy-set man and a very jolly-looking person, and he had his school in his own apartment. There was a long table. We all sat. He had a lot of kids there, including me, and each one took their turn to say what they had, how we were taught how to learn how to daven. And I recall very much that I think he received 25 cents maybe a week, something like that. As I recall, it was a small amount of money. Of course, not now. It's not a small amount, but in those days it was money in those days. But then, as I got a little bit older, my father entered me into another class. This was on Sheriff Street. We changed our apartment. We lived on Lewis Street, but we changed to another street. This rabbi, Chaim was his name, if I remember correctly. Was an old man with a great beard. He had a long beard, and he was very strict. And I learned something from him too. That was in my very early days. As a kid, after I got a little older, not too much older, maybe I was maybe 8, 9 years old. I tried to make some money. So I went down to the Forward Building. There's a Forward Building on East Broadway where they print the newspaper, the Jewish Forward. And in this Forward this Forward place here, there was a lot of boys like myself, or maybe much older than me. They were all waiting till the papers come off the press. As soon as they came off the press, they'd get the first crack at it. They would get the first batch of newspapers. They'd go ahead and sell them, and hawk them in the street, hawking the name of the paper Forward. And then by the time I got to it, I was able to pick up maybe 10 or 15 pieces, maybe 10 pieces, I suppose. And when I went to go out and sell them, I had a hard time because most of the streets were already covered by the previous newsboys. So I had a pretty hard job, but I gradually got rid of 10 pieces at the most. And I think there were 2 cents a piece in those days. So it was a big deal. But anyways, that was my early recollection as being a businessman, selling newspapers.
Dad, I wonder, do you remember anything about your brothers or sisters that lived with you in Lewis Street?
Well, I haven't got too much of a recollection, but I remember when my younger brother, Izzy, what we used to call him Itchy, when he was born. As I recall, I was a little boy myself, but I recall that he had to get circumcised. So the circumcision was taking place in the apartment where we lived. At that time, we lived in Lewis Street. I think it was 86 Lewis Street, if I remember correctly the number. We had moved already a few times, but that time I'm not sure if we moved anymore. I think that was one of the first places. But anyways, Itchy was born at that time, and I must have been maybe 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old, because that's the difference in our ages. And I recall the house was full of people, and they carried Itchy as a baby to the rooms in the mall. The man who does the circumcision, he done his job, and there was a big crowd in the apartment, and that apartment there, and that was that's the time when Itchy was circumcised. That's one of the earliest recollections of my baby days. And I recall one time, my mother was combing my hair. I don't know when it was before my age. I think it must have been after she was born, but it could be much after. My hair was growing long, and I had sort of blondish hair, as I recall, and I was standing in front of the mirror. In those days, they had these long mirrors that only reached the ceiling down to the floor, and it's a very beautiful mirror, which is probably doubt if there's anything around in this world today. Maybe they're all gone, but it was a beautiful thing, and I could stand. Stand in front of it to see. But I sat down, and my mother was curling my hair. She was combing my hair, and I had long hair. I didn't have a haircut yet. I don't think I had a haircut yet till about maybe a couple of years later. I probably must have had a haircut. But she combed my hair and she curled them. That was my mother doing that to me. I also recall in the winter time, we on Saturday we didn't light any fires because it was Saturday was a very holy day, and we hired a man to come in Saturday morning to make the stove. We had a stove in the kitchen, like the old-fashioned stoves that you have. The old-fashioned stoves. Probably they're extinct now. I suppose nobody can find one, I suppose. And he came in and he'd come in and start the fire, and then come back a couple hours later and put coal in the fire. We used to know the coal is a very interesting thing. Coal was very cheap in those days, and we used to buy coal from the coal mill, like we'd go out for a pail of coal. I don't know what it cost. It might have cost about 10 cents a pail, I suppose. But there was a coal yard about a few blocks away from where we lived in Shelby Street, and I don't recall exactly. It was on Garrick Street. It was the next block to Lewis Street. There was a coal yard where people used to hire out. They order a ton of coal, and they would have a horse-drawn wagon would deliver the coals. But that particular street, when they came out of the coal yard, naturally there was the streets were covered with they were
Cobblestone.
There were cobblestones, and as the truck goes over the stones, it shakes the wagon, and these coals were piled up high on that coal wagon, and a few coals would drop off as they go through the streets where the cobblestones were, and we'd go after the cobblestones, and we'd pick up all the coals that fell off the truck. So we used to go home, and we'd have a pail of coals practically every time we'd go there. It wasn't too many times, but we went there a few times, and we brought home the coals, so we didn't have to go and buy them. That was one of the interesting things in my young days. And we had other things that we had. It was a very important part of my life in those days. We lived, as I told you, on Lewis Street, and when it came Sunday seemed to be a very unusual day. All the kids, all the little fellas like myself and a little older, more or less, we used to play. We didn't play, we used to gamble with pennies. And at that time, the Lincoln pennies came out. And the Lincoln came out, I think the first Lincoln penny came out about 1909 was the first Lincoln penny. And the game was, we'd match the pennies, we'd guess the pennies. I put a penny on the course with the face down, and some of the fellows who were a little bit anxious to gamble with us, they'd have to guess that penny, what date it is. And if they guess the right penny, they take the penny. But if they lose, if they don't guess the right age, the right year on the penny, I would win. I would win his penny. But there was one fellow who was very, very smart in guessing pennies. And of course, this must have been about, I tell you, 1904 was the time I was born, and this must have been maybe around maybe 1912 or something, I don't know. Anyways, I don't know if we used the Indian pennies also, I'm not sure, but I know the Lincoln pennies were very easy to guess. But there was maybe 2 or 3 years of them only, because I think they started only in 1909. So between 1909 and 1912 was only 3 years. Anyways, we used to guess the pennies. And the guy who was very smart, he guessed 2 for 1. He'd put down 2 cents, but he'll guess the 1909. He guessed every penny. He seemed to know on the back of the penny, on the tail side, what the year was. And he used to he'd make all the winnings. He's one of the smartest guys in the bunch there. But we had a lot of fun. And of course, all we had is pennies to play with. That was another interesting thing. There's many things we used to do. We used to play. We used to play Johnny on a Pony. We played Johnny on a Pony. We'd sit down. We'd get together a bunch of boys, maybe 5 or 6 of us at one time, and we played Johnny on a Pony. It was a lot of fun there. We used to jump on one guy's head, fight the last guy there, and we try to go as far as we could go, and we keep on until somebody falls down. That was another thing. Well, that was in the very early days.
What about your public school experiences? What public schools did you go to?
Well, when I started to go to school, the first school I went to, I think I went to I know one school I was in was PS 22. I think that was the school that I started as 1A. When I started in 1A, but I somehow, I don't know, must have been a smart kid, but I never went to 1B. I went from 1A to 2A. Otherwise, when I had to be promoted, I skipped 1B. So that's where I was in the school in PS 22. That PS 22 was on, I think it was on Sheriff Street near the park. There was a park there, Hamilton Fish Park. That was there, and that Hamilton Fish Park is also a very interesting thing. In the summertime, we had skating in the Hamilton Fish Park. There was a big open area. So just a lot. It was a paved street, and we went skating there, roller skating. And we used to go. I got somebody, my mother, I guess, must have bought me a set of roller skates. And at night toward the later part of the evening, we'd go down there and we'd go skating into the nighttime because the streets were lit up a little bit. We could see what we were doing. We used to go out roller skating. That was a lot of fun we had those. I was a little older than I was supposed to have been a little older. But we moved away from.
What were the street lights you mentioned? What were they? Were they electric? Were they?
Well, they were lit. They were lit with the. It was a gas lighting. They had these. They used to call them some kind of a. You have to change it every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's some kind of a. It's not a bulb exactly, but it's a lighting system. They're not bad. We had light. It was a gas lit streets. There were these lampposts that we had in those days, and these lampposts were set pretty not too far apart, and the streets were lit up pretty good. But we had light. I don't think we had any. I don't recall any electricity in those days, even in the apartments, because we had to have the same gas in the apartments. In the apartments where we lived in those days, we had what you call there's what they call it in the apartment. You got to put it in the meter. We had a gas meter. We have to put a quarter in the gas meter, and that quarter would give us enough light until the quarter ran out. We have no light. We have to put another quarter into the meter. That was in every apartment because it came from. That's how it worked.
You mentioned that you remember Itchy, growing up with Itchy. Do you remember any other brothers or sisters?
Well, I didn't have any other brothers except Itchy was my only brother, and then I had a sister, Eva.
You remember her?
Yeah, she was.
She was older than you?
Yeah, she's a few years older than me. She passed away. She died very young. I don't know exactly what she died from, but she died. And Itchy was a little bit younger than me, and he had different friends than I had. When we moved to Brownsville, that's when we lived in Brooklyn already. That's the time Itchy had his friends in Brooklyn, in Brownsville, because he came a little bit younger than me, and he was able to find friends right away. I was being a little bit older. I had a harder time to find friends in the street. I was already a little older than him, and I couldn't.
So you're saying you moved from the Lower East Side, which is Manhattan,
yeah,
to Brooklyn, Brownsville and Brooklyn.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
She made friends right away, somehow quicker than I did. And he had one very close friend by the name of Heshy Cohn, Harry Cohn, of course, but we used to call him Heshy. And Heshy was a very strong fellow somehow, and his father was in the building trade. His father was some kind of I would say more like a delegate in the union, but he was working in also. And of course, he took in Heshy to be a laborer to work in the building trade also. They used to, as a building in the building construction business. So Itchy, being he was so friendly with Harry Heshy, he asked Heshy to wants to get into that trade, that union. And being Heshy's father had a lot to say in the union, they got Itchy in. But the only way Itchy could get in is to pay an initiation fee, and the initiation fee was $300. I'm going back a little bit, $300, and by that time we already were living in Brooklyn. We were living on starting place.
Okay, you've really jumped ahead in time because that you were already married.
Yes.
Yeah, so you were already married. We'll have to. We can talk about this, but I want to get back to some of how you met Mom and things like that. But I know what you're saying as far as Itchy. Why don't we drop that now? Because you might just say where the $300 came from.
Well, you want to know where the $300 came from? I gave Ruthie. We were married already. I gave Ruthie a diamond ring, which I bought from a pal. In those days, there was custom peddlers, and this guy came along and he had the ring that I wanted, and I bought that ring from this year. Man, $300. I think I paid $300. No, wait a minute. I paid something like $300. I paid for that ring.
That was a lot of money.
Yeah, well, in those days it was a lot of money. I don't know how it is, but I bought her a diamond ring, $300. Now that diamond ring, I had need for money, and I had put it in a pawn shop. I had it pawned, and Itchy wanted to get into the union, and he had to pay $300 to get into the union. So I must have taken out. See, it's very hard to remember. It's a long time ago. I had to redeem the diamond ring for Ruthie, so I should. Let me see how I see it was here. He needed $300 to get into the union. Ruthie had lent. I didn't have any money, but this ring was able to give him. I was able to get $300 on that ring, and I gave him the $300, and he got into the union. But I didn't give him the money. The money was Ruthie gave him the money. That's my wife, Ruthie. She gave him the money because she wanted him to be to get him to make a good living, because that was a very strong union. It was called the Big Six at that time. That was the name of the union, the Big Six. And anybody who was in that union, it had to be somebody in the family. Well, Heshy was a very close friend to Itchy, and his father was a delegate there, so all he had to do was pay the money, and he became a union member. It so happens that the ring, we had to pawn the ring again to get the money. But I think the next time we pawned the ring, we pawned it. I think we had to pawn it again, and we had to get the ring out of the pawn shop after she was working. And we had a hell of a time to make him pay back the money to get the ring out of the pawn shop. But he gradually had to come through, because I wanted to get the ring back for Ruthie to have it, and that's how she got her ring back. But that's how Heshy Cohen became one of the workers in the building trade, and he turned out to be very, very good, because he made big money in those days. All the union men made big money, because that was a very strong union, a very close union, and there was no such thing as non-union workers in the building trade, except maybe there might be some small people that would make a little house somewhere. But the big buildings, they were all union and very strong.
So can you go back a little bit in time now? Now At this point, you're already married. Let's talk about perhaps the time you met Mom. Can you remember?
Oh
that?
yeah, yeah. I met Mom when I was about 16 years old. But that time, I don't know what year was it, what year it was, but it could have been maybe 1920 or so, I suppose. 1920 or so, and my father, who was married previously in Europe, he had 4 children there. And I think I never know what happened to his first wife, but I have to assume that she must have died because there was no he wasn't as far as I remember he wasn't divorced. As far as I understand, he was never divorced because he came to this country and he married my mother. He married my mother, and a few years later, as I told you, my father had children from his first wife, so he had 4 children, as I said. So there was two girls. One was Gussie, one was Esther, and the two boys. One was Harry, and one was like Wolf. All the 3 children came to America. How they came here, I can't recall because I really don't know how they got here, but they got here. That's the 2 girls and Harry. Harry was the youngest of all the children. And like Wolf was a little older, but he stayed back in Europe. So when Harry came here, I got very friendly with him because he was like my brother, because he was actually a half brother. Well, anyways, we got very friendly, and in those days, people that came from the same country, like they came from a city by the name of Dukla. This was in Poland. That was the name of the city. The city of the name was Dukla, and in Dukla there was a lot of everybody knew everybody in the town. It's a small town, and everybody was knew each other. It was all strictly, as far as I know. I was in. There was a healthy families, all mostly Jewish people. There was other people too, but there was a lot of Jewish people. They used to go to the prayer. They used to pray in the same temple, like a whole family. Well, most of these fellows that lived in Dukla also came to America because everybody was running away from Poland because Poland was being invaded by the Russians in those days. They were supposed to be. It was pogroms, what they call pogroms. That they'd raid the city where the Jewish people lived, and they would and the soldiers actually would come in there, and they would ravage the city and steal and probably maybe even rape some of the girls there because that's what they looked upon the people there that they were not of their faith, so they took advantage of them. Well, anyways. As I said, these people came from Dukla, so most of them came to America, and they all settled on the Lower East Side because that was the easiest place to settle. Because they arrived down near the Battery, where it was called in those days Castle Garden, that they called it. That's where their entry was to come into America, and they all came into most of them to New York City, and they settled on the Lower East Side. And so amongst them there was maybe could be a couple of dozen of these here fellows, and and they were already they were more than teenagers. They were actually almost 18, 19 years old, pretty old. They were warm, but they were grown up boys. There were no children actually at that age that they came here. So they used to have a Saturday night dance room on the Lower East Side on Clinton Street. Clinton Street. And there was a hall there that they called it the Clinton Hall. It was like people they used to have weddings there, and on Saturday nights they rented it out for dancing. And the people that came to dance there were mostly what they call landslide. That means they were friendly from the hometown. And there was girls and boys there, and they danced there all the time. There was bands of music there. And people they went there to get friendly with the girls, and they wanted to keep company with the girls. And that's where Harry Harry was my brother. He said we gotta go to the dance. We'll go. Maybe we can find a nice girl to dance with. You know, we were pretty big fellows. We were 17, 18 years old, 16 years old, something like that. Anyways, that's where I met my wife Ruthie. She was amongst the people because she had also arrived from Europe at that in those days, and that's where I first met Ruthie at this dance. And later on, of course, I kept taking her out. We went out as like boys and girls goes out, and that's in time I married Ruthie. That's the only one I married because I got used to living there. Me taking her out, and I began to feel that we were made for each other. That's one of the instances of my very early life.
What about you had mentioned something about some of the earlier cars you had.
Oh yeah. Well, that's after I married. I married I believe in 1929. I married Ruthie, and she lived also in Brooklyn, but she lived in Williamsburg. I lived in Brownsville. When I had to come to see her, to take her out for a good time with her or something, I'd have to come down by the elevator, take the elevator. The elevator used to be the Broadway IRT subway, but in Brooklyn, it was overhead. It was we had to take the train overhead to get off it. Had to get off on the Lower East Side from Brooklyn after we crossed the East River Bridge, and that was called the Lower East Side. And from there, the bridge used to end at Clinton Street. That's the end of the Brooklyn Bridge of the elevator, and then it would go underground. And the first stop after crossing over the East River, the first station was the Lancey Street station. That was the subway station already from the overhead train that we came into. And then from there, I'd go over, and anyways, that was the early transportation in those days. And I go, see, Ruthie lived she lived in Brooklyn. And I lived in Brooklyn. That I didn't have to go. I didn't really have to go with the elevator in those days. No, I must have been taking the trolley. There was also trolley cars running underneath the street under the elevator. You know, there's like tracks. And they had the old fashioned electric cars at that time that had them. Anyways, I used to meet her at home, and she lived in 16 Belvedere Street, and that's how I used to go to meet her. Take her out. I would take her out on Saturday night. I'd come there, and we used to go down from there. We'd take a walk over to Clinton Street, and we'd walk over as far as Essex Street, which is 3 blocks further going toward the Bowery section there. But at Essex Street on the corner, there was a Chinese restaurant, which we went in to see a Chinese restaurant up on the first floor. And that's why I took her on those days. We used to go for a Chinese meal. I took her for a Chinese meal. With a Chinese restaurant there. I took her out. I don't know, in those days it was very cheap, I'm sure, but I can't recall exactly what it was. But it must have cost a very small amount to buy it, to have a Chinese restaurant, have a meal. And we enjoyed it. That was my courtship days.
Mm-hmm. Let me go back a little earlier than that, Dad. You mentioned the first job you had was selling newspapers for the Daily Forward.
Yeah.
You must have had other jobs after that maybe you could recall. Then you once told me you peddled, you gave away tickets for a fortune teller, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, that's right. When I was a little boy at that time, we lived on Lewis Street, and Lewis Street, there was this cross street, and the lengthwise streets, but the long streets was Rivington Street on one street, and the Lancey Street on the other side. And between the Lancey and the Rivington Street, there was those side streets. Lewis Street was one street. After Lewis Street came Cannon Street, and after Cannon Street came Columbia Street, and after Columbia Street came Sheriff Street, then came Willard Street, and then came Attorney Street, then came Clinton Street. All these were side streets. They have to run some more streets, but I just come over there. I just tell you up to Clinton Street. So now, but we were talking about Rivington Street. So when I used to walk over to Rivington Street, and somehow or other, I don't know how I got acquainted, but I got acquainted with a woman by the name of Pollock, Mrs. Pollock. Now, this Mrs. Pollock was living on Rivington Street, and Rivington Street had a lot of these. Rivington Street was known as the pushcart street because on both sides of the streets there were those pushcarts, and each pushcart had different materials for sale. Most of them they had vegetables, bananas, peaches, oranges, according to what was in season. Bananas, tomatoes, everything in those days, and oranges. In those days, everything was sold not by the pound, but by the piece. You can buy an orange for 2 or 3 cents. You can buy an apple for maybe a penny or something. It was everything was, the bananas also were very cheap, maybe a penny or 2 cents a piece. So that particular block had pushcarts on both sides of the street, and the stores, being most of the houses over there in those days were all tenement houses on both sides of the streets. Tenant houses, they were high, tall houses. They were about at least 4 flights. Most of them were 4 flights or more, sometimes even 5 flights, but 4 flights surely, where people lived up on the first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. But the first floor was really up the stoop. You had to walk up the stoop maybe 10 or 15 steps to get into the first floor, because all these buildings also had basements, and the basements were about 4 or 5 steps down, and they were also apartments where people lived there. Now in Rivington Street, I must have got acquainted with somebody, and I was told that there's a Mrs. Pollock there who tells fortunes, fortune teller. So she used to, she had cards printed somehow, and she needed somebody to give out the cards to advertise her business that she's a fortune teller. And she used to tell fortunes mostly to women, because there were most of the girls they were also imported, also were immigrants who had come from different parts of Europe, mostly the Jewish area, and they all were on the Lower East Side. Was really a Jewish section, more like a ghetto, if you want to think about it, how it was. It must have been. Anyways, I was told to go up to Mrs. Pollock, and she used to give me a bunch of circulars, like little cards. They were cards, and she says that I should give them out. I should give them out to the girls when they come out of the subway. The subway station was the Lansing Street. Girls used to work in the factories, and a lot of them lived on the Lower East Side. So when the trains came in with the passengers, there was a big crowd coming out from the subway, and a lot of them were girls. And every girl I used to hand out one of those cards. And from those cards, they'd have an address, and they'd all be able to. And a lot of them came to Mrs. Pollock because she has her address on there on Rivington Street, and she used to tell their fortunes. She was a fortune teller. So how did she tell her fortunes? Through the cards. She used to tell the cards and how the cards fall. She used to tell them that they're going to get married. This is going to be this right. She was pretty good at telling fortunes, and her telling fortune was with cards. She charged 25 cents. I remember she charged 25 cents for telling the fortunes, and if they wanted to have a better fortune told, she would charge them 35 cents, but that would be on the hand. She'd look on the hand where the lines were on the hand, and she'd tell them a fortune. It was a little bit more in detail than with the cards. And she must have made a good name for herself, because she was always busy. She always had 5 or 6 girls, mostly girls in the marriageable age, and they're waiting for their next to hear a fortune. That was and she had a son. One son. She had a lot of children, but most of them were still in Europe. But they had one son that was living with her. His name was Izzy Pollock. He was as I recall, he was a very blondish fellow, very handsome kind of a fellow, and I got acquainted with him. I liked him. like a big brother to me. And when I used to come there to get the cards, and he'd be in the bedroom, and then this here girl was sitting in the living room there. It's like it's like a kitchen, but in those days, the way they had the apartments, there was plenty of room for them to sit down, and they wait for their next. Now, Izzy Pollack had to keep out of the way from his mother telling fortunes, so he used to stay in the bedroom. So in the bedroom, he had a light there, as far as I understand, and then he had a light there, and he had a phonograph. He had a phonograph. In those days, there was a phonograph with a big horn. You turn the handle, and then you play the record. And he used to play some records that he had that they used to get. He used to play it on that Victor. Victor was the name of the dog picture. Victor Victrola, and that was a box and a handle and a big horn, and he used to play it. But he also had a girlfriend there. He had a girlfriend there, and she used to come to see him there, and they used to be playing around. They probably mushed themselves up a little bit, but that's what his girlfriend. But he never married her. He married somebody else. But that was one of his first girlfriends. And that was also Izzy Pollack. But he was a very smart fellow, I suppose, because he turned out to be in a certain kind of business that's more. In those days, the automobile business was fresh, was very new, because it was in those days there was very little automobiles. But he was in that some kind of business with the automobiles, and I used to go to see him. But I never knew exactly what his job or what his work was. But he was connected with some maybe the underworld, for all I know. But he was a very nice guy, and he used to take me out on a Saturday now and then to a restaurant. Although I have my own home with my mother, father, but Saturdays he took me out. He'd call me up, or not he'd call me up, but he'd get in touch with me, or I came in touch to his house. He'd take me into a restaurant. A restaurant was one day. There was a restaurant on Sheriff Street. On Sheriff Street was a restaurant. At that restaurant was where they used to serve a 7-course dinner. They used to give you everything for a 70, and he'd take me in there, and he'd take me in, and I should join with him in the restaurant for a dinner. In those days, the table was a 7-course dinner. And I recall how he ordered for me the same thing that he got for himself, or something like that. And then the final dish, after we got through with all the previous dishes, like the soup, we'd have soup, and then we'd have fish. First the fish, then came soup, then came chicken, then there was Simmers there. Simmers is like a side dish of something to eat, and the last dish was a noodle shallot. It was a noodle shallot. The reason I say noodle shallot because it was made with noodles, and it was like a cake. It looked like a cake, and that was to wind up with that, of course, with a cup of tea, and that was the kind of dinner that I used to enjoy. And now and then when Izzy Pollack took me out.
How old were you then?
I must have been about 13. I said, no, not 13. I was not 13. I was about 10 years old, maybe. That's one of the things that I remember. What more can I tell you?
Well, that's pretty good, Pop. But let's just go on a little. You might be getting a little tired, but let's just go on a little bit further. Now, you mentioned to me that some years later, for example, that you ran into Mrs. Pollack again.
Oh, yes. I ran into Mrs. Pollack again. I went to Coney Island with Ruthie many times. Of course, after all, we were still courting her. We weren't married yet. And one day I was in Coney Island with Ruthie, and I walked around, and all of a sudden I come across Mrs. Pollack. I had stopped taking her job a long time already because somehow I don't know if she continued being a fortune teller, but she recognized me, and I recognized her. She had left a lot of children in Europe. She had a lot of girls, a lot of children. I think she had 4 daughters in Europe, and she had Izzy Pollack was in New York with her. And I think she had an older son than Izzy, but he wasn't with her. He was older than Maria, than Izzy. And when I seen her, she recognized me. It's a funny thing about that because while I was giving her out, while I was advertising her business, fortune telling, she liked me. So she said to me, "I got a girl for you. When she comes to America, I'll give you one of my daughters." She said, I got a Hasha. Her name is Hasha. Hasha is for you. When she'll come to this country, you get married to her." She said that was me when I was still young, when I didn't even know Ruthie. Well, that was just a conversation like that, and that was that. But I was when I met her on Coney Island, she she recognized me, and she says, "Why do you want to meet my daughter here?" She had a big woman next to her. She was a big, heavy woman. She must have been one of those, real husky type women. And I was really a skinny guy. I was just very slim. And she said, "My daughter's Kasha." She said, "You're supposed to marry her, but she's already married," she says. So I met her in Coney Island, and I met my supposedly girl that I was going to marry, but she was probably twice my size, but just just a coincidence in my life at that time.
Mm-hmm. Tell me some other things that maybe as you were growing up. I know that weren't you friends with what's it?
Maurice Taubman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was married to Maurice Taubman in those days. It was a little bit later. I was probably in the age of 15, 16 maybe.
Uh-huh.
And I got friendly with a fellow by the name of Maurice Taubman. He lived also on the east side. Of course, he lived on East 8th Street. He lived on East 8th Street near Tompkins Square Park. Tompkins Square Park was somewhere around 8th Street and Avenue C. And there was I just put a little park here that's around there. And people used to go at night there or daytime.
Is that like Borough Park now?
Huh?
Is that like Borough Park?
No, that was on the east side.
Oh, that's it. That's
the
in
lower east side, yeah.
Okay.
That's where we still lived on the east side. This is the Tompkins Square Park. So that's Maurice Taubman's area where he lived on the third floor, I think, in one of these tenement houses. I got very acquainted with him, and I used to go out with him. He was a little bit older than me, a couple of years older than me, I suppose, and we got along very nice. He was a very friendly guy. And we used to go shoot pool. We used to play pool in the pool parlor. We used to go down. On the Avenue B, on Lower East Side Avenue B, there was a movie house. That movie, you go to the movies on Avenue B. I think it's corner 4th Street or 5th Street was a movie house there, and it was that. And on that corner on the other side of the street was a pool parlor, but the pool parlor was in the basement. You had to walk down maybe 15 steps to go down. It's like a real basement under. Because Avenue B was a business street. Theater on one side, stores on the long side, and on the other side, it was always lit up there because the movie has always lights. The entrance was a very bright street in that particular street. On the other side was a couple of stores, but to go down to the pool room, you had to walk about 15 steps down to go to the pool room. And I used to go down there with Maurice Taubman that we shoot pool. We used to have a couple of games of pool. And I recall distinctly where we used to go pool, they had some kind of a phonograph there, and this phonograph, they played records. And the record that I remember was sang, but Al Jolson's record was there. They used to play Al Jolson's record. These are the songs that are very collectible items today, I suppose. But I recall as we were playing pool, we'd hear Al Jolson singing his songs, his famous songs. That's Maurice Taubman. And I was a working fellow anyhow at those days. I had a job. I used to change jobs, not too often, but my first job that I had that I recall, I worked for a dental laboratory, and I got I think $6 a week.
How old were you then?
Well, about those years, and I was about in those years, maybe it was 16 years or so, or something. Those days, yeah, those years, you know. And then I changed my job, and I got a job on the.
You were telling me you got a job in the dental laboratory.
Yeah, that was the first job. I didn't last very long, but I recall I came to work the next week. The place was closed. The guy disappeared. Who owned the home? He didn't show up. He didn't show up to his job, and that was the end of the job and the end of my experience in dental laboratory. I got another job as an errand boy. I got a job as an errand boy for Schulte's bookstore. There's a Schulte's bookstore on 4th Avenue in New York City also. 4th Avenue, New York City. There was on a site there was a John Wanamaker's building was there, and that section there around 4th or 5th Street, I think. Then it was on the 4th Avenue, yeah. And a block or two further was stores on both sides of the street, and that was a book section where they sold used books. In other words, it was a bookstore, and they might have new books too, I suppose, but they also had used books outside. They have a stack of used books on the counter there. People used to pick them up and buy them for 10 cents a piece. It could be 15 cents a piece, anything that they liked. But in the basement of that Schulte's bookstore, he had a printing shop. After a while, I knew I was supposed to be an errand boy, but somehow or other, I was sent down to the basement where the printing shop was, and I was taught how to work in the printing store. So I learned the trade to be a printer. My printing was not in the types, but it was on machines, on the hand feeding machines. I used to feed. I learned how to feed the sheets into the press, and the press closed, and the press would close and print the sheet. And I open it up. I take out the printed one and put a fresh one in. So I used to feed them like that. And I learned how to be a feeder. That became my real trade. And from that trade on, I kept on. I was from there. I don't know. I didn't last too long on that job there. I recall that the man who was in charge there, the pressman was the manager. The pressman was the man who prepared the printing sheet. He prepared the printing to be printed for the feeder to feed it. There was a load there. There was no automatic machines like they have today. And his name, I think I forget his name, but he was an Irishman, and he always was. He was a big man, I remember, but he was a very good man. But he used to go off on a every once in a while he'd go out and get drunk, and he didn't come into work. So when he didn't come into work, there was no work for me because I had to do the feeding, and he had to prepare the press. But they told me where he lived, and they said that he lives on. They gave me the address. He lives on 3rd Street. 3rd Street is the street where the elevator runs. The overhead elevator runs on the
3rd Avenue.
No, 3rd Street.
3rd Street.
3rd Avenue. That's right. 3rd Avenue. That's the elevator runs on 3rd Avenue. That's right, not 3rd Street. 3rd Avenue. And they gave me his address, and I went to look for him. Because I went, and I recall going into his house where he lived in the apartment. I found him laying in bed, and he was drunk. But he recognized me, and anyways, I don't know what happened, but I came to this place. They should come back to work because they wanted him to finish. Because the printing had to be, they used to get orders to be printed, and they had to have to complete the jobs. Well, that was one of the early experiences of my job. That was Schulte's bookstore.
Did you get him to go into work?
Well, I told him, and I suppose he must have gone back to work. But I didn't last too long with him either, because I was looking for a better job. I got another job as a printer in the printing field. I got a job, and after that, another printing job. I got one job. I got one job on 6th Avenue. And this was a stationery store. Also the stationery store, but it was they had a lot of printing customers, and I got a job there to be a printer there. And I say also a feeder. But at that time I was able to do a little press work myself because I learned from the Schulte store how the pressman was doing his job. So I was able to play around and not play around exactly, but able to do the small jobs. So small jobs required not too many, it was not too complicated. I put on places. We used to use glue to hold the slugs in the machine so that you could, when you feed the sheet, you gotta get right into all these spots there. They should be even. All should be printed the same way. Well, I was waking up in that place, but I didn't work there too long either. So I recall I got another job, also in the printing line. This time I got a job in an insurance company. An insurance company. This was downtown on the Lower East Side, the lower part of Manhattan, on Cedar Street and Rita Street. Cedar Street was a street in the Lower Manhattan in the financial district. That's where the financial district, Wall Street, was all around there too. And this year's side streets, Cedar Street, they had an insurance company. I forget the name at the moment, but they used to print their own forms for the insurance needs for the insurance different kinds of forms that they need for the insurance business. And I got a job in there as a feeder. In those days, they didn't have individual motors for each motor for each machine, but they had what they called belts. One big motor operated the 3 or 4 presses that were on there, but they had to go with the belt. You had to use like a well, just like you got the you drive a car, you got to put it in gear. Got to put it in gear, so you put it in gear, then your machine would run. Then your machine would, you want to stop it, you take it off the belt, and it slides off, and the press comes to a stop. Well, I worked in that place there.
You know what the name of the press was?
Yeah, this was a I think it was a Gordon press. A Gordon press. That was I had that job, and I was able to set up my own jobs already because it was.
Would you call that typesetting?
No, that's working on the presses. I didn't touch the types. See, the types, you had to be a compositor. If you was a compositor, you would do work on the types. And the compositor was a very good trade already. That was already a skilled trade where you have to know where to put the letters in. In those days, they didn't have machines like they have today. They had letters. We had to put the letters together and then put them on a stone. They call it a flat stone. And they'd lock it up tight in a frame. And then that would come into a big frame. And they take the frame and they give it to the man who runs the press. And they would give it to me. I'd put it into the machine and lock it up. Then I could start the machine and press. See, they have to get approved. They have a CAD, see if it's printed. If all the printing is correct. Otherwise, if there's any mistakes, they take the form out, put it on the stone again, correct the necessary alphabet that is required, the letters that's required to correct the print. They shouldn't have the wrong print. So that was in the insurance company's office. That's what insurance company's insurance company's printing department. Well, in that particular store, that particular job that I had, as I told you, I had a friend, Maurice Taubman. He was never a fellow that was working. He was more of a street guy, but he was a very nice guy. So I told him, I got a job for you. I want to come into work in my place. I can get you a job in there. So he says, I'll come in there. I'll come into work with you there. So I got him into work in that printing office from the insurance company. A couple of days. He wouldn't work more than a couple of days. And after that, he quit because he was not used to working. I don't know what he did exactly, but he didn't stay there too long. But during the time I stayed there maybe a few weeks or so, not too long either. The name of the foreman who operated up in the printing department, his name was Marr, Mr. Marr, Maher, if I'm not mistaken. And Mr. Marr, he was an Irishman, I think, and he had a son. and worked also with him in the printing department. You know, they got a father, well, foreman. He got a job there, and somehow his brother, his son rather, didn't seem to take a liking to me. I don't know for what reason, but he didn't take a liking to me, and he used to bully me. Well, one day he really bullied me to the point where we had a discussion. He said, "I'll get you downstairs." He said, "I'll meet you when you go home." I says, "Okay, you can meet me when you go home. I'll be down there. I'll go down." So I go outside, and there he's there waiting for a fight. So I also was ready for a fight. He was taller than me, if I recall correctly, but I understood that the only way to beat a guy is to hit him in the stomach. So when he started up with me, I started fight with him, and I hit him a couple of shots in the stomach. And before you know it, he quit. He quit on me, and he quit. He didn't want to fight no more because I hit him. I hit him in the stomach, and I didn't wait for no. I didn't. Must have been smart enough to know where to hit him. Well, anyways, the fight stopped right away, and then when his father found out, he gave his son an argument for fighting with me. But after that, he became my best friend. He was my best friend, and he had respect to me. He was my best friend. He didn't have no more grudge against me. I didn't work there too long, also, of course, in those days I changed jobs. So somehow, the next job I got was also in a printing line. This was another place. These are all our short periods, you know. There was another printing shop on East 4th Street. This 4th Street, East 4th Street, this was a big printing shop where they had big presses, what they call presses that print large sheets of paper. I forget the name of the name of those presses, but it wasn't a hand press. It was a big press where you had long sheets, and you put long sheets in, and they go around just like a newspaper comes out. It was one of these kind of big sheets. Maybe it'll come to me the name of that press. But anyhow, that's the press they have. But I worked in the hand press job department there. But my brother Itchy also had a job working. He was a little younger than me, but he had a job. He worked in a leather belt factory where they make leather belts, and it was a very unhealthy kind of a job. It was a hard job too. So I asked Itchy if he wants to come to work in my printing place, I might get him in there. So he says he'll go in. He'll quit his job at belt because he didn't like the belt whatever it was. Anyways, I got him a job with that company. The name of the company was Streep and Hill. Streep and Hill. That was the name of the company. So he got the job. They were teaching him how to feed the big press. The big press, you know.
Mm-hmm.
How long we lasted there, I don't know. We didn't last too long there either, both of us. But that was my early jobs I had in those days. I used to have all kinds of jobs.
Sounds like you had quite an interesting career.
Yeah, and all my young days. I might not know exactly what year it was, but it was in those years that I had the jobs. I always get from one job to another.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned, that Harry came later to the U.S.
Yeah.
And so did your two sisters, Gussie and Esther. And I suppose somewhere along the line, Jessie must have showed up too. Or
Jessie
she came with your mother, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Jessie was with us all the time, but she was older. She was older than me. She was older. She was much older than me because much older would mean she was a couple of years older. That would be much older.
Well, where did these children live? Where did these people live?
Well, you mean Jessie lived with us?
Did she? That's what I was asking
Jessie
earlier.
was living with us, but she had a friend. She had a friend that she used to go to visit with. But she lived with us. But She always bullied me. She was the older sister. She had the right to call me. She used to call me a very bad name. I don't want to mention it now. But I had to take it because she's my older sister. I was afraid of her. And she was bigger than me. I was afraid of her. I didn't want to. After all, you gotta have respect for your older sister.
So there was a period of time
she was older than Eva. Eva was a year older than me. So, but Jesse must have been 2 years older than both of us or so.
I see.
Yeah, but
So there was a period of time when Itchy, you, Eva, and Jesse lived together,
oh sure,
but Harry never lived with you.
Harry never lived with us. No,
How about the other two girls?
they didn't live with us either. They must have been with some other family.
Uh-huh.
They came to this country, but they seemed to have married somehow. They married pretty good as far. One married Jake. Gussie married Jake Bax. His name was Jake Bax. She married Jake Bax, and he was a carpenter in the theater carpenter. He had a big name in that business. And that business, he was an older man, of course, and I was a young boy, just a young guy. But he was he had a he had he used to work on the Jewish theaters. When they had to change the scenes, he used to replace the scenes, and he used to do carpenter work on stage carpenter. He was a stage carpenter, and he got a what you call a very good salary. Of course, there was a strong union there, and just like the building trade was for my brother Itchy, so was the union for the stage carpenters. That it was like a closed union. Anybody gets in there's got to be a father to a son and so forth, because they had it all controlled. So Gussie married Jake.
Mm-hmm.
They lived on Prospect Place, the Prospect Place in Brooklyn. Now you're talking about Brooklyn, and of course Harry was a brother to Gussie and also a brother to Esther. And that's how when I told you that I had friends, I got friends with Harry. I used to come with Harry to visit his sister Gussie, who lived on Prospect Place.
And that was your sister as well.
Huh? Well, my half sister, the same way. And the other sister, she had married a guy by the name of Honig, Ben Honig, and somehow or other she moved out to upstate New York. What is that city again? I forget the name of the city.
Port Jervis.
Port Jervis. She lived in Port Jervis. He had Port Jervis. He had a house. They owned a little house there, and they also had a fruit store. And he used to buy fruits wholesale, and he had a route up in the country, up in the mountain section there, Catskill Mountains, to go to the different hotels and sell them wholesale fruits and vegetables in bulk, in quantities to take care of their customers there, the people who come to have a vacation there in the summertime. So he had a route. He used to go to there were certain camps that he used to deliver his fruits and vegetables. He was a real strong, husky guy, and I think he drove it. They already had cars. They already had trucks ready in those days, and he always hired a man working for him, so that the guy can help him with the driving, and also help him with taking off the loads off the truck to deliver the merchandise that they ordered. And that was Esther, and she had beside that she had the front of her house. She had like a fruit and vegetable store, because he had the wholesale business, and so she had a retail business from the stuff that he had for his place. So it worked out pretty good. We used to go to visit. Esther with Esther Honig there, and we sometimes stayed over there. We stayed over. Maybe did we stay over? I don't know if we stayed over. Now, how did we go to visit there? I'll tell you that. I can tell you that also. So actually, I came with Harry, because I was his sister. How did we get there? The trains were running in those days. The trains were running. The engines were running. Anyways, we got there. I think we came there by trains. There was we Weehawken trains ran up upstate there, and there was a steam engine trains running. Steam engine trains. Anyways, we used to go visit there, and she used to have in the backyard. She used to have strawberries growing in there, so we used to have strawberries there. She used to have in the backyard. She had trees. She she had 4 children. Let's say she had Izzy Indig. He became a judge. He was educated. He became a judge. I think he's still alive. I'm not sure.
He is.
Yeah. And there was Nathan. Nathan, he got into the insurance business. And there was Louis. Louis, he died. He had died. And so they had Louis. Then they had one girl, by the name of I just got a letter from her the other day, some time ago. She lives in California here somewhere. She lives in I forget her name for a moment, but she had 4 children.
One of them lives here in California.
Yeah, she lives in California. Lipton, she married a guy. She married a guy by the name of, no, Lipton was not her husband. Lipton was another girl's husband. Lipton was the husband of Jesse's daughter. Jesse's daughter.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, but
so
anyways, this girl, I should remember her name because when I got married with Ruthie, we went to the mountains for a honeymoon, and then we stayed in a hotel there, and the same hotel that we stayed, Gussie came along with her daughter. This daughter, I can't think of her name for a moment, and then naturally she was there with her daughter, also just for vacation because we went there. When we went there to for our honeymoon, we also took along Lily. Lily was Ruthie's sister. Lily had a lot of children. She had the youngest child was Lucille, and at that time when she was born normal child in every way, but she developed a lot of sores on her head. Maybe it was an infection or something, and she had to be taken care of. But at that time, somehow or other, we took her along. Lily took Lucille, gave Lucille to us, and we took her along on our honeymoon. Lucille became our honeymoon baby because on our honeymoon we took her along, and she was no more than 3 or 4 months old. See? But the reason that we took her along, I think, must have been because Lily had to go to the hospital for some reason. And she had a lot of children there. She had her own other besides Lucille. She had Arthur.
No, Arthur wasn't born. Arthur wasn't born yet. Arthur was not born yet.
Well,
Arthur's the youngest.
Arthur's the youngest?
Yeah. She would have had Irving.
I thought that Lucy was the youngest one.
No.
Yeah. So in other words, Arthur was the youngest one, then came Lucille.
Right. Arthur was not born yet.
All right, Arthur, you're right. Yeah, Arthur was the first child, and Lucy was the second child. The third child was Eleanor.
No, Irving. It was Irving.
Irving, then Eleanor, and then Sonny.
Sonny or Al.
All right. Anyways, these are the four. So she had her hands full, even with that, whatever.
Yeah.
So and she couldn't handle the baby. So in other words, Arthur was not yet born. Okay.
Right.
So that clears that up. So we took her along. We took her along to and that's how we came to have Lucy with us. She was our honeymoon baby.
I'm going to ask you one more thing because it's getting late and you must be getting a little thirsty. We've got to give you something to drink pretty soon.
No, it's okay.
All right. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I'll continue this interview later on, but the last thing I wanted to ask you was you had told me a while ago something about a family of boys that you got to be very friendly with, and eventually you lost contact with them. But years later, you ran into the girl through one of your activities in the union. Many years later. Do you know what I'm?
Yeah, well, you know what that is. When I was friendly with Maurice Taubman, he came from a family of a lot of boys and one girl, and one of his also know also she must have been he had one of his relations, close relations. I think it was. I think she was the daughter of Mrs. She must have two girls. She had one girl at home with her, and another other girl that married. If that's, I think that's what it was. Yeah, she was married. And Maurice Tobman, and then when I was married, she was married to a man by the name of Solowitz. His name was Solowitz, and he had a stable. He had a stable where he rented out horse and wagons. You know what I mean? Like instead of a push cart, anybody would want to go out with a horse and wagon. He'd rent them out for the day, and for the day he'd have to pay. He'd get paid. I think it was at that time $3 a day, and they would have to give him. He also gave him a bag of feed for the horses to feed the horses during the day. Well, this Mr. Solowitz, he had a lot of children, all boys except one girl, and that girl is the one that when I was retired from my working days, that's after 1976. I used to go to my union because the union that I belonged to, they also had the retirees union after you retire from the city. It was a good deal with the union. Developed a very good union where after you retire, you join the retirees union. You get the benefits that the union provides for the retirees. So they had programs in the union. The union's name was District Council 32, and all the people who worked for the city in different agencies, different departments, and belonged to the union used to come to these different programs that they had. Monday there was a program. Tuesday, and every day was a program. Even Friday, every day. I think that Monday was the dancing program, where you can go dancing, ballroom dance, not ballroom dancing. It was like not square dancing, but folk dancing, and there was a teacher there, and we danced and have a nice time there. And there was women and there was men there, because these were all people who had retired from their job, and they were taking advantage of the program. So they had Monday they had dancing classes. Tuesday there was something. Anyways, there was Thursday. I know there was bridge game. I joined the bridge game. I joined the dancing class. I joined the arts and crafts. The arts and crafts was also there on Wednesday. I don't know what about Tuesday. I don't recall what was on Tuesday, but I know I had the dancing class. I had the arts and crafts class where they painting, and I had the playing bridge. So I had the 3 days that I had. I don't know what was Tuesday. I don't remember what was Tuesday. But then they had a program for Friday, which I only went a couple of times. I didn't go any further. That was the typewriting. They teach you to typewrite. Anyways, that's what I had. So that's when in the dancing class that I went there. All of a sudden, there's a lady comes along, a very handsome-looking woman, gray hair, very, very nice person, nice little person. She walks over to me and she says, "Aren't you Joe Indig?" I says, "Yeah." And she told me who she was, and I couldn't remember. And when she got married to a doctor. She got married to a doctor, but I think she must have lost him or died. He died of something. But she was married to the doctor, and he had an office on Stone Avenue, somewhere there. Anyways, that's the woman that you wanted to know about him. How I come to know her.
What was the relationship of this? You mentioned Solowitz,
Yeah.
but you mentioned that the man had a stable.
Yeah.
But how you mentioned somehow there was a relationship between Maurice Taubman and the Solowitz family.
Yeah, sure.
What was the relationship?
The relationship was it was his older sister.
But his name was Taubman, And what is
Yeah, but she named was Solowitz because she married Mr. Solowitz. Well, I might not have it exactly clear, but she was a good relation because we went there to visit him, and Ruthie lived in Belvedere Street,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I don't know if we were married at that time or not. We must have been married. You see, a lot of things that's not quite clear because Izzy, her brother Izzy Rich. See, Ruthie's name, her maiden name was Rich. Ruth Rich. That was her maiden name, and she lived in Belvedere Street. And in her family, her father, mother was her stepmother, her real father, but a stepmother because he married the second time. His first wife had died. Ruthie's mother had died when Ruthie was a child.
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah, but Maurice Indig married this woman that was supposed to be in his home, in his home where he lived in Europe. And the country was Dickler was the country, and he married her because she told him she'll take good care of his children, and he agreed that she'll do that. And he had the children, 3 girls, and he had 2 boys. No, not 2 boys. 2 boys came from him. She had the 3 girls.
So the 2 boys came from the second marriage.
Yeah, from the second marriage, and then they all came to this country. And the youngest one, his name was Izzy. And, the youngest name was Jaime. Jaime was younger. Izzy was the older boy. There was maybe a year or 2 difference between them. But Izzy, I got friendly with Izzy because I was going out with Ruthie, so I know her brother. But Jaime somehow he was always out with some gang all the time, and he was not. I wasn't close with him, but Izzy, I had always something in common. Why I don't know. Izzy was a plumber. That was his trade, a plumber. In those days, automobiles were very scary, very scarce, and they were always, the streets were not crowded. Well, and somehow or other, Izzy got someone gave Izzy a car. It was even before the insurance was in. I think the insurance was still not yet compulsory. Automobile insurance. It became compulsory, but at that time you didn't have to have insurance. You could have it, but it wasn't compulsory. And somehow Izzy got a hold of a car, a Studebaker. This Studebaker was a very big car, and it was a very luxurious car. What year it is, I don't know, but it must have been a pretty old car, one of the early ones that they built, and it was one of the big ones. And so Izzy couldn't do nothing with the car, so he gave it to me. Now, why did he give it to me? Because he taught me how to drive, so I could drive, and I got my license because I got my license. In those days, it was easier to get license than it is now. Because after all, I'm talking now a long time ago, maybe 70 years ago or something like that. That's a long time. Since that time, there's a lot of things changed. So Izzy got this Studebaker, and he had a car of his own. He had a little car of his own, so he gave it to me. All right, in those days I gave it to me, so I was able. He taught me how to drive, and I got my license. So I had a Studebaker. I didn't have the Studebaker take more than a couple of days, as I remember. And one of the sons of Mr. Solowitz, who had the stable, the horse and wagon stable there. He had he had about 6 or 7 boys and this one girl, the daughter. But one of his sons, they were all big fellows there somehow. And one of his sons, he was, I forget his name, but he says, "Hey, why don't you lend me your car? Lend me the Studebaker." And so I lent him the Studebaker because I was younger. I didn't know it's such a terrible thing that you lend him. I figured he'll bring it back to me. I told him, "You lend me, bring it back to me." So I lent him the Studebaker, and somehow he was able to drive it. So he drove the Studebaker, as far as I understand, and it came in front of the stable there, on the street there, and it's parked over there. So, and I never got the Studebaker back. So I wanted to find out what happened why didn't he bring me back the Studebaker? So I got back to him, and he was in Bronzeville, lived in Bronzeville too, This was in Bronx, sure. And yes, in Bronx. So Studebaker was standing right outside the door. He says, "I can't move it." He says, "Can't give it to your back. I can't drive it. I don't want to ride. It doesn't. In other words, it broke down. So I broke down. I figured out, no good. I got it for nothing, so I forget about it. That's why I had no reason to try to get it back. And I was young, and it didn't mean nothing. I didn't have it, so I didn't have it. That's the story that my brother-in-law, who is now an old man like I am, and he's right now in a nursing home over in Long Island. So that's one of the incidents that happened in my young life.
Okay, today, let me just tell you what today is. Today is January 24th, 1995, and this is the second recording session that I'm doing with my father, Joseph Indig, the story of his life, and we hope that it'll be interesting. It was the last time, and we hope it will continue to be interesting. The last time we did this, it was about the time that you got married, Dad, and you got married around 1930. Do you remember what kind of work you were doing about that time?
I think that I must have been working at that time in a. I worked at time in a company that was a bookbinding company, where I was. My job was to feed a universal press. A universal press is a very heavy machine, which as you feed the sheets into the press, and the press closes, instead of a print, it makes a cutout. And these cutouts, naturally, I take them out again and as I put one in, I take one out. I put one in and take one out. And these sheets, I lay them down, and then after a while, they're taken apart, and the cutout is what is left from the impression. That was in other words, I was what you call at that time was a feeder in a universal press, and that was my job. But it wasn't a very. It was not a permanent job like an all-day job. It was only a job in this particular company. When they had work, I was called in. I got the job in the beginning through the newspaper ads in the New York Times. And in the New York Times, they have what they call employment. They register in the paper different kinds of people that they want to hire to work. This is under the printing department, where they are looking for a feeder or a pressman or a compositor, something in the printing business. And I answered the ad, and this was for this particular bindery. And I worked there. I came down there, and they hired me. I got the job to be a feeder on this universal press. Of course, I didn't realize that they had work only certain hours of the day, and if they didn't have any work, I wasn't.
You remember your supervisor?
And the man who was in charge his name was Mr. Schwartz. He was a tall, strong, big guy, and he was very strict. But for a foreman, it's a foreman. He took care of it. I was not the only one there. There's a lot of people working in different parts of the bindery. I was the feeder on one of those presses. I started to work, and I was satisfactory as a worker because I was able to do the job. When I get through with my job, whatever I had to do, was maybe a couple of thousand sheets there to feed in. And if there was no more work after that, he would send me home. 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, he'd send me home, and he says, "I'll call you when I need you again." Otherwise, it was a job where I used to get temporary calls. But I had no other job, so when I was
Okay.
home,
That must have been about the time you first got married.
that must have been, I must have been already married. Yes.
Okay. Do you remember anything about your wedding? Can you tell me anything about your wedding? Since I don't know anything about it.
Well, all I can remember is we hired a synagogue. I think it was on Hazel Street, on Brownsville, Brooklyn and Brownsville Street. In Brownsville and Brooklyn and
Did you say Herzl Street?
Hazel Street.
Uh-huh.
It was a very, very big synagogue there, which I used to attend to on the weekends, I believe on Saturdays. And I went down there with Ruthie's father, Maurice Rich, and we rented that place out for my wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't exactly remember what exactly the exact date is, but it was.
Well, that's okay. You got married in the year 1930.
Yeah, I got married there. We had a nice wedding there, and we had all of my relations were invited. And I recall that my uncle Louis was there. My uncle Louis was a man who had a retail hat store on Pitkin Avenue. He had a nice big hat store on Pitkin Avenue, and he was he was there with his family. We had a nice crowd. It was a nice crowd. I got married, and I was living at that time in Grafton Street. I lived in 53 Grafton Street in Brooklyn, Brownsville. And my mother had passed away already, and I was there with my father, and I guess I had my brother Itchy too there, and I had I think my sister Eva, she had died also. So I was just left with my brother and my father.
Oh, I don't quite understand that. Are you saying that after you got married, was this before you got married? You were living in Grafton Street? Must have been before you got married.
That must have been before I got married, yeah.
Okay, so what do you remember about the wedding itself? Do you remember anything about it? You said there was lots of people. Was there dancing? Was there music?
Yes,
was there a meal?
Yes, we had music. There was music there, and there was food. We had, I think, on this particular synagogue, there was a basement there, and we had a big table spread out, a very large table spread up with benches all around, and food was brought out. I recall, I think I remember putting up $300 for this whole business myself. I don't know how I got $300. I imagine I must have saved up that money. Don't forget, this is a long time ago.
Well, I thought the bride paid for the wedding.
Well, I don't know exactly how it was, but the wedding was made.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice marriage when we got married. Now, after we got married, I went on my honeymoon. We had a honeymoon right after I got married.
Where'd you go?
And we went to, I arranged to go to Monticello. Monticello up in the mountains, up in the Catskill Mountains. And I got in touch with my sister, which was one of my father's children from his first wife. She lived in Port Jervis, and I told her that I was going to be up in I was going to go to the Catskill Mountains, and I picked the place there. I think it was the Barsley Hotel, and she said that she's going to come up there also the same week while I was there for my honeymoon. And she came up.
Which sister was this?
That was her. This was Esther. Esther, her second name was Honig. Esther Honig. She had a little girl, still had one little child, I think she must have been about 6 years old. Her name was Faye. That was a little girl, and she came with her. And we spent our honeymoon there. And Esther Honig with her daughter was doing that week also. That's where we spent my honeymoon. I can't remember exactly where where I went back to when I went back to New York.
How did you get up to to this place in Monticello?
Well, in those days, there was there was there was a railroad. I think it was I think it was New York, New Haven, and New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad ran a train up to the mountains there,
I see.
and that's how we got up there by train. In those days there was a train. There was no other way of going up there, as far as I know, that I can think about. I know we must have gone up there with the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. This is one of steam engines, those steam engines in those days. And we came back the same way.
I know that when you went on your honeymoon, supposedly you took Lucille with you. You remember that story?
Oh, yes, you're reminding me. At that time, I was still courting Ruthie before we got married, of course, and her sister Lily Geduldig had lived in a nearby. Ruthie's home address was in 16 Belvedere Street, and Lily Geduldig, her sister lived a few blocks away. It was called Ditmars Street, and they owned a house. Her husband, Lily's husband, his name was David Geduldig. He was part owners with that house with his father. In other words, it was a two-family house. Lily had one floor, and his father with his family lived on the second apartment. Lily had the upstairs apartment, and Geduldigs, they were living there. The family Geduldigs had the bottom apartment. And Lily had a big family. She had a lot of family. She had a lot of children. Her youngest child was named Lucille. Lucille was a baby. Was just about born. She was a few months old, but she developed some kind of a rash or a sores on her head. Otherwise, the doctor was treating her, but she had sores on her head, which required medical treatment. And for some strange reason, when we went on the honeymoon, I don't know the reason why Lily entrusted the baby in our care, but she trusted the baby in our care, and she was about 4 months old. She was about 4 months old, and we took her along with us on the honeymoon. And we took care of the baby. Ruthie, she seemed to have not how to take care of little babies like that somehow, and we had her with us for doing our honeymoon. We must have gone to live with Ruthie's parents, her father and her stepmother, for a short time, until we were able to set up home for ourselves. I must have been with them. It's hard to me to be exactly the things that they point the incidents of my early life. But I know where Lily lives, she had a neighbor, which was there. The houses there, the two-family houses, were all attached together. And the next house to her was one of her friends, one of her neighbors. I can't remember her name for a moment, and she was a very nice person. And we needed to buy furniture. Well, I was telling you, we went to buy the furniture, and we went to buy the couch for the living room. The living room set. It was a beautiful couch made with a mahogany frame, carved out mahogany, and the upholstery was brocaded velvet. That means that with pictures on the velvet, on the back of it, as you lean back on the couch. And the lady who took us to this hotel, she was a neighbor to Lily Geduldig, just her name was Mrs. Kingsbury. That was her name. I couldn't think of her name before. It's Mrs. Kingsbury. And she took us to this wholesale place, and that's where we bought that beautiful couch. The rest of the furniture we bought on Essex Street in the Lower East Side. And those days, that was the furniture section where people used to go to buy furniture in those furniture stores. And that's where we bought our bedroom set, which was a very nice set. We had it for many, many years.